For Crema Media in Johannesburg, I'm Sane Dlamini. Investigative journalist and author Rehana Rossouw joins me to discuss her book titled Predator Politics, Mabuza, Fred Daniels, and the Great Land Scam. So, Rehana, can you tell us in a nutshell about David versus Goliath type battle that was between the small guy, Fred Daniel, and the big man, Deputy President, now David Mabuza?
Oh, it is a long battle. The battle is almost 16 years old. Fred Daniel bought 84 farms in Mpumalanga from the late 1990s to build a conservation project. He wanted to restore land that had been destroyed by asbestos mining and poor farming practices, stock them with animals, let nature do the job of healing the land after it was degraded. And he set about this project because he believes that humans have had a negative effect on nature, that we need to learn how to live with nature. And this is an important lesson that people are now talking about as they discuss climate change around the world. Unfortunately, at the time that Fred started buying farms in Mpumalanga, Didi Mabuza was the MEC for Land and Agriculture in the province. Fred was doing his work. He was working with the Mpumalanga government, especially the Parks Agency, to rehabilitate land. And then suddenly a whole rush of land claims were put in the area where he was buying farms between Badplaas and Barberton, and things fell apart. Fred realized that most of the claims that were being made in the area in the late 1990s were false. They weren't justified. They weren't based on any historical ownership to the land. He blew the whistle, and that was the start of his battle with Didi Mabuza.
We know that you have previously written fictionalized semi-autobiographical books about life growing up in the Western Cape and about being a journalist. What now inspired you to change gears and write a book of this nature?
Fred Daniel himself. Fred approached my publisher and said that he would like a book written about himself. My publisher looked at his story and contacted me and asked if I would be interested. I had been a journalist for 30 years, so I had 30 years of experience writing nonfiction. And so I said yes, and the book Predator Politics is the result.
And this book, when I read it, it also touched on the graft-related allegations that were revealed during the construction of the Mbombela Stadium. Can you tell us more about this and the related threats of physical intimidation?
After 1994, Mpumalanga's provincial government was corrupt from the get-go. As soon as national government transferred money to the Mpumalanga government, they started using taxpayer funds for fraud. The Mbombela Stadium is such a shocking story. Built for the South African Soccer World Cup, resulted in the assassinations of two very senior ANC leaders who had started complaining as soon as the stadium project got underway that there was a huge amount of corruption. Again, Didi Mabuza was MEC for Land and Agriculture as the process started to build the stadium and became premier while the stadium was being built. Mpumalanga was, until recently, the province in South Africa that had the most political assassinations. 22 assassinations have been recorded in the province. KwaZulu-Natal has now overtaken them, but they were the worst. And the World Cup Stadium was built and people died, and it was very, very tragic. The amount of scams involving land and the transfer of land to Black communities around South Africa is problematic. But in Mpumalanga, the billions of rands that has been wasted, or the billions of rands in investments, which Fred was planning to bring into the province on his land, has just, been gone down the drain.
And if I may to ask, how would you respond now to those who may say that this book is meant to tarnish David Mabuza, South Africa's deputy president?
There's nothing that I have done to tarnish David Mabuza. David Mabuza seems to have done a lot in his political career up until now to raise serious questions about the way in which he conducts himself as a politician. There was a lot of fears. A lot of people, when I told them about the project that I was working on, said, "Aren't you scared?" And I'm like, no, why should I be scared? Everything that I'm writing about, we all know about up until now. The Auditor General is an amazing resource if you want to find out about the extent of corruption in Mpumalanga. If people want to kill me for that, I suppose nothing I can do to stop them. But I have faced no threats up until now, and I don't expect any.
And as an experienced journalist, from another young journalist, if I may say so, how do you feel about looking at what is happening in our government?
Oh, you know, the last few months, I have spent so much more time looking at American politics than I have at South African politics, because it's actually made me feel a little bit better about our country. We are heading down that road as well, where politicians lie, where they open their mouths sometimes and lies come out, and there are people who believe it. But watching the American elections and watching the rise of Donald Trump has shown me, and I think a lot of people around the world, the dangers of investing too much in one person. The ANC should not be one person. It shouldn't have been Jacob Zuma's ANC. And today it's not Cyril Ramaphosa's ANC, and it shouldn't be Didi Mabuza's ANC in the future. It's supposed to be a movement representing the aspirations of millions of South Africans.
We know that Mr. Daniel and his family, they have suffered while trying to expose fraudulent land claims. Can you briefly share what they have been through?
It started off with threats. First, we had a bus arriving in the mid-1990s outside the gates of Fred's conservation project. People bussed in to come and protest and to demand the land from Fred, even though they had no historical claim to the land. They threatened to petrol bomb his petrol station that morning of the protest and wouldn't give up until Didi Mabuza arrived, stood on the back of the bakkie with the loudhailer, promised the toy-toying crowd that they would get the land that they had no historical claim to, and thanked them and told them to disperse. That was the first time that Fred saw Didi directly involved in stoking false land claims against his properties. There had been, in the time that all of these land claims, these fake land claims, were being processed in the Badplaas region, several people opposed to the new land claims, especially Black landowners who had been restituted and who were now facing competing claims from an organization headed by Didi Mabuza while he was the MEC for Land Affairs. They suffered as much as Fred. Petrol bombings, arson, shooting at vehicles, death threats all the time. I mean, at the Badplaas police station, a group of people who said they were inspired by Didi Mabuza held the police hostage. The Badplaas area, businesses were burnt down, houses were burnt down, people's property was destroyed, people died while these fake land claims were being lodged. But it wasn't only Fred. It was Fred and everybody else fighting against fake land claims. But in the end, they drove Fred out of Mpumalanga. He had to leave for his own personal safety. There was an attempted assassination at worst, or an attempt to smear him at best, that involved very senior people in the Hawks and in police intelligence. Fred went to court to try and stop them from smearing him. They had drawn him into a fake assassination plot. Somebody came to him and said, Didi Mabuza is planning to assassinate you. After that, Fred realized that he and his family were no longer safe in Mpumalanga.
If someone were to ask now, Rehana, that why is Didi Mabuza after this land thing?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think because there is so little forensic investigation of so many land transactions in South Africa since 1994. When the Land Restitution Act was first passed, when I was a reporter still, I traveled around the country, you know, where there was restitution, people were handed their land, they had plans for their land, everybody was happy. The SIU did a report, the Special Investigating Unit did a report late last year into land claims around South Africa. And it seems that, you know, government officials around the country have perverted the restitution process to enrich themselves.
And what else will the readers get from reading this book? And if you can also tell us what has been said by those who have read the book.
As I said earlier, a lot of people said I was brave. I got very little anger. I got very little condemnation after the book was published. Fred has sued the government on 15 occasions and won every time. He is now bringing a 1 billion rand court case against the South African government, its agencies, and Didi Mabuza. His court case is going to be heard later this year in August. It's a special proceeding in the North Gauteng High Court. Fred has agreed that the court does not have to discuss the 1 billion rand and whether he's entitled to that or not. All Fred wants from the court is a finding that he faced harassment from the provincial government in Mpumalanga after he blew the whistle on land fraud. He's a man who won't back down. He went to the police on several occasions. He's been to courts on several occasions. He's won his cases. He's not going away. He wants justice. And not only for himself, he wants justice for his black neighbors who had plans for their own land as well, and whose land was hijacked and other people moved on into it.
And lastly, you've dedicated this book to journalists. Can you tell us why you chose to do this?
2 reasons. Firstly, I received a writing fellowship from Wits Journalism to write the book. They paid for all my travel expenses. And also when I started writing the book, after I met Fred and I started researching the book, everything that had happened to him had been reported already. Journalists in Mpumalanga, journalists around the country had been writing about the story, had been seeking justice for land claimants whose land had been fraudulently taken from them. So I was, you know, I thought it was going to be a difficult task, and my job was made so much easier by so many excellent journalists who had already written the story. But it's shocking how much we forget. You know, at the time Bombela Stadium was being built, we were all watching what was going on there. But then we forget because another corruption scandal comes along, and the corruption scandals get bigger and bigger. What used to be like a 1 million rand corruption scandal is now heading towards 1 billion rand. So we forget what happened in the past.
That was Rehana Rossouw in conversation with Polity about her book titled Predator Politics.